September 24th, 1944. Dawn broke cold and uncertain across the rolling hills near Aricourt, in the French region of Lorraine. A thick blanket of fog had settled overnight, reducing visibility to mere yards and transforming the countryside into a ghostly maze of shadows and silence. The air carried the acrid smell of diesel exhaust, wet earth, and the metallic tang of morning dew on steel armor. Somewhere in that white void, two of history's most formidable armored forces were about to collide in a battle that would challenge everything the world thought it knew about tank warfare. Inside the cramped turret of an M4 Sherman medium tank, Staff Sergeant Lafayette Poole adjusted his headset and peered through the periscope into the impenetrable mist. The Continental R975 radial engine behind him rumbled with a steady, reassuring rhythm that had carried his crew through 3 months of continuous combat across France. Poole's Sherman, bearing the name "In the Mood" painted in white letters on its hull, was part of the 3rd Armored Division's spearhead, advancing toward the Moselle River. What lay ahead in that fog was the stuff of nightmares for any Sherman crew. Elements of the German 11th Panzer Division, including the dreaded Panzer IV Panthers that had terrorized Allied armor since their debut at Kursk. The Germans had good reason for confidence that morning. Their intelligence reports indicated that Patton's Third Army was overextended, running low on fuel and ammunition after its lightning advance across France. The Wehrmacht's tank commanders, veterans of the Eastern Front, had learned to respect American industrial might, but remained contemptuous of American tank design. They had nicknamed the Sherman Ronson, after the cigarette lighter company's advertising slogan, "Lights up the first time, every time." The joke had spread through German armored units like wildfire, reinforcing their conviction that American tanks were mobile coffins, effective only when supported by overwhelming numbers of aircraft and artillery. Oberst Heinrich von Lauchert, commanding the 11th Panzer Division, had spent the previous evening studying aerial reconnaissance photos with his staff officers. The images showed scattered American tanks advancing in small groups, apparently unaware of the German armored concentration building in the Aricourt sector. Von Lauchert's Panthers, with their long-barreled 75mm KWK-42 guns and frontal armor up to 100 millimeters thick, had proven capable of knocking out Shermans at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. His tank commanders had joked over dinner about the turkey shoot they expected when the fog lifted and revealed their prey silhouetted against the morning light. But the technical specifications told a different story than German propaganda suggested. The M4 Sherman, while indeed more lightly armored than its German counterparts, incorporated engineering innovations that reflected American industrial philosophy. Its welded hull construction, pioneered by Detroit's automotive industry, could be mass-produced with tolerances impossible to achieve in Germany's increasingly desperate wartime economy. The tank's suspension system, adapted from railroad locomotive designs, provided superior stability for its 75mm M3 L40 main gun. Most critically, American tank crews received far more comprehensive training than their German counterparts, who by late 1944 were often rushed into combat with minimal preparation. The Sherman's greatest disadvantage lay not in its design, but in the tactical doctrine governing its use. American armored forces had been trained to exploit breakthroughs created by infantry and artillery, avoiding tank versus tank combat whenever possible. The German Panther had been designed specifically as a tank destroyer, built around the principle that superior armor and firepower could dominate any battlefield encounter. This fundamental difference in philosophy would be tested brutally in the coming engagement. As the fog began to thin with the rising sun, Poole's driver, Corporal Wilbert Richards, reported movement to their front. The distinctive rumble of German Maybach engines echoed through the mist, their 12-cylinder roar easily distinguishable from the higher-pitched whine of American radials. Poole counted at least 4 separate engine signatures, indicating a full German tank platoon advancing toward their position. Radio chatter from other Sherman crews confirmed what Poole already suspected. They were outnumbered and potentially surrounded. The first German tank to emerge from the fog was a sight that struck terror into Allied crews across Europe. The Panzer IV Panther AUSFG, weighing 45 tons and stretching over 22 feet in length, represented the pinnacle of German armored engineering. Its sloped frontal armor, angled at 55 degrees, could deflect most Allied tank rounds at combat ranges. The long barrel of its 75mm gun, extending nearly 12 feet beyond the hull, gave it a predatory appearance that had earned respect from Allied intelligence officers who studied captured examples. Poole's gunner, Sergeant Bert Hamby, had already loaded an M61 armor-piercing shell into the 75-meter gun breech. The American round, while effective against earlier German tanks, had proven inadequate against Panther frontal armor, except at extremely close range. Poole knew that his only chance lay in achieving a flank shot against the enemy tank's thinner side armor, but the fog made precise maneuvering nearly impossible. The Sherman's mobility advantage meant nothing if they couldn't see their targets until it was too late. The psychological warfare began before the first shots were fired. German tank commanders had learned to use their vehicles' intimidating appearance as a weapon, advancing slowly and methodically to maximize the terror effect on enemy crews. The Panther's turret traversed with mechanical precision, its gun barrel sweeping back and forth like the head of a hunting predator. Through his periscope, Poole could see the German tank's commander scanning the terrain with binoculars, his black uniform and peaked cap visible above the turret hatch. What happened next became the subject of intense study by American armored warfare specialists for decades afterward. The German Panther, confident in its technological superiority, positioned itself hull down behind a small ridge approximately 800 meters from Poole's Sherman. The range allowed the German gun to penetrate any part of the American tank while remaining effectively invulnerable to return fire. The Panther commander was following doctrinal procedure, establishing fire superiority before advancing to close range for the kill. Poole made a decision that violated every principle of American tank tactics. Instead of attempting to withdraw or call for artillery support, he ordered Richards to advance directly toward the German position. The Sherman's engine roared as the tank lurched forward through the thinning fog, its tracks churning up clouds of mud and vegetation. To German observers, this appeared to be either desperate bravery or tactical insanity, exactly the reaction Poole intended. The Panther fired first, its 75mm KWK-42 gun sending an armor-piercing shell screaming across the battlefield at a muzzle velocity of 935 meters per second. The German gunner had aimed for the Sherman's turret, knowing that a hit there would disable the enemy tank's fighting capability, while leaving the crew alive to be taken prisoner. A consideration that reflected the Wehrmacht's increasingly desperate need for intelligence about American intentions. But Poole had anticipated the German firing solution. In the crucial seconds before the Panther's gun fired, he had ordered his driver to execute a sharp turn to port, using a technique learned during training exercises in England. The German shell, aimed at where the Sherman should have been, instead struck the tank's sloped frontal armor at an extreme angle. The high-velocity round deflected upward, its tracer element creating a brilliant streak of light before disappearing into the overcast sky. The psychological effect on the German crew was immediate and devastating. Tank commanders throughout the Wehrmacht had been taught that Panther guns were invincible against Sherman armor. The sight of their perfectly aimed shot bouncing harmlessly off an American tank challenged fundamental assumptions about German technological superiority. Through intercepted radio transmissions, American intelligence later learned that the German commander's first reaction was to assume his gunner had loaded a defective shell. Poole used the enemy's confusion to close the range rapidly. The Sherman's superior acceleration, a product of its lower weight and well-tuned Continental engine, allowed it to cover the remaining distance in less than 30 seconds. As the range dropped below 400 meters, Poole's gunner acquired a clear sight picture of the Panther's right side armor, where the 80mm welded steel plates formed a near-vertical surface vulnerable to the American 75mm gun. The M3L40 gun had been designed for flexibility rather than raw penetrating power. American ordnance engineers had optimized it to fire a wide variety of shells, including high explosive rounds for infantry support and white phosphorus rounds for creating smoke screens. But the armor-piercing M61 shell, while less powerful than German equivalents, incorporated metallurgical advances that reflected America's superior industrial capacity. The tungsten core penetrator, hardened using techniques pioneered in Detroit's automotive plants, could defeat German armor when fired under optimal conditions. Poole's shot struck the Panther's side armor at a range of 350 meters, well within the parameters established during Aberdeen Proving Ground tests. The tungsten penetrator punched through the German tank's welded steel, like a red-hot poker through aluminum foil, creating a shower of molten metal fragments that ricocheted around the Panthers' fighting compartment. The German loader, standing directly in the path of the spalling fragments, was killed instantly. The gunner, temporarily blinded by the flash, lost control of his weapon system, but the Panther was far from finished. German engineers had designed the tank's internal layout to survive multiple hits, with fire suppression systems and ammunition storage that minimized the risk of catastrophic explosion. The German commander, though shaken by the penetrating hit, immediately ordered his driver to reverse position, while his radio operator called for support from the other Panthers in the platoon. Poole found himself facing a tactical nightmare that had haunted Sherman commanders throughout the European campaign. Having achieved surprise and scored a damaging hit, he now faced the prospect of engaging multiple German tanks in a running battle where his ammunition and armor disadvantages would become decisive factors. The fog that had concealed his initial approach was continuing to thin, eliminating the environmental conditions that had made his aggressive tactics possible. The solution came from an unexpected source. Corporal Richards, the Sherman's 19-year-old driver from rural Mississippi, had grown up hunting in dense pine forests, where sound navigation was often more reliable than visual tracking. As the damaged Panther attempted to withdraw, its wounded Maybach engine began producing an irregular rhythm that Richards could distinguish from the approaching sounds of the other German tanks. Following Richards' audio cues, Poole maneuvered the Sherman to maintain contact with the damaged Panther while avoiding the other German tanks that were converging on their position. The American crew could hear urgent radio chatter in German as enemy commanders attempted to coordinate their response to this unexpected development. What they couldn't see was that Poole was using the damaged Panther as a shield, positioning his Sherman so that the other German tanks couldn't fire without risking hits on their own vehicle. This tactical innovation emerged from desperate necessity rather than formal doctrine. American tank training emphasized mobility and coordination rather than individual tank versus tank combat. But Poole's crew had developed an intuitive understanding of armored warfare through 3 months of continuous operations, learning lessons that couldn't be taught in any military manual. They had discovered that German tank commanders, despite their technical advantages, often became predictable when forced to operate outside their established tactical parameters. The damaged Panthers commander made a crucial error that reflected the Wehrmacht's increasingly strained training standards. Instead of coordinating with his supporting tanks to establish a crossfire that would eliminate the American threat, he attempted to engage the Sherman in individual combat. Pride and institutional conditioning drove him to prove that German armor was superior in single combat, even when tactical circumstances favored a coordinated response. Poole's second shot struck the Panther's turret ring, the vulnerable junction between the tank's hull and rotating turret. American intelligence had identified this weak point through examination of captured German vehicles, but achieving hits there required exceptional marksmanship under combat conditions. The M61 shell, though it failed to penetrate completely, jammed the Panther's turret traverse mechanism and disabled its main gun elevation system. The psychological impact of this hit extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. German tank crews throughout the Aracourt sector could hear their commanders' increasingly desperate radio calls for assistance. The idea that a single Sherman could disable a Panther in direct combat challenged fundamental assumptions about German technological superiority that had sustained Wehrmacht morale since the early victories in Poland and France. But Poole's greatest advantage lay not in superior equipment or training, but in his understanding of industrial warfare's psychological dimensions. American tank production had reached levels that German intelligence found literally incredible. Over 49,000 Sherman tanks would be manufactured during World War II, compared to fewer than 6,000 Panthers. This industrial capacity allowed American commanders to accept losses that would be catastrophic for German formations, creating tactical flexibility that trained German officers found difficult to counter. The engagement's decisive moment came when the second German Panther, advancing to assist its disabled companion, encountered an obstacle that neither tank crew had anticipated. The morning fog had concealed a drainage ditch that ran parallel to the German advance, creating a natural tank trap that forced the Panther to expose its side armor while negotiating the obstacle. Poole's gunner, Sergeant Hamby, had been tracking the approaching tank through sound and brief visual contacts. When the German vehicle's silhouette became visible through the thinning fog, Hamby already had his sight picture established and was ready to fire within seconds. The range was less than 250 meters, close enough for the American 75mm gun to penetrate even the Panthers' frontal armor under optimal conditions. The third M61 shell struck the German tank's ammunition storage compartment, triggering a secondary explosion that sent the Panthers' 45-ton turret spinning through the air like a discus. The blast created a pillar of fire and smoke that rose above the fog layer, visible to German and American observers across the entire Aracourt battlefield. For German tank crews, the sight confirmed their worst fears about American tactical adaptability. For American crews, it provided proof that German armor was not invincible when engaged under favorable conditions. The remaining German tanks in the platoon faced a dilemma that reflected broader strategic challenges confronting the Wehrmacht in late 1944. Continuing the engagement risked additional casualties that German armored formations could not afford to sustain. But withdrawing would confirm American technological and tactical competence, undermining the psychological advantages that had sustained German resistance despite mounting material disadvantages. Poole made the decision for them by advancing aggressively toward the sound of the remaining German engines. This violated every principle of American armored doctrine, which emphasized consolidation and coordination after successful engagements. But Poole had recognized that the fog provided a fleeting opportunity to achieve results that would be impossible under normal visibility conditions. The 3rd German Panther, commanded by a veteran Obergefreiter who had survived 2 years of combat on the Eastern Front, attempted to establish a defensive position that would allow his superior gun range to dominate the engagement. But the fog negated his primary advantages while amplifying the Sherman's superior mobility and crew coordination. For the first time in his combat career, the German commander found himself fighting at close range against an enemy tank crew that showed no intention of respecting German technological superiority. Poole's 4th shot missed its intended target, but achieved a psychological effect that proved equally devastating. The M61 shell struck the ground directly in front of the German tank, sending fragments of stone and metal showering against the Panther's vision blocks and periscopes. The German commander, temporarily blinded and disoriented, lost track of the American tank's location just as Poole maneuvered for a flanking shot. What followed became known among American armored units as the Aracourt maneuver, a tactical innovation that emerged from battlefield necessity rather than formal planning. Poole used the Sherman's superior acceleration to circle the German tank at close range, forcing the Panther commander to traverse his turret continuously while never achieving a clear firing solution. The German tank's superior firepower became irrelevant when its crew couldn't maintain visual contact with their target. The technique required exceptional coordination between the Sherman's driver, gunner, and commander. Richards had to maintain precise control of the tank's movement while navigating by sound rather than sight. Hamby had to track the German tank's position through brief visual contacts while compensating for his own vehicle's motion. Poole had to coordinate these activities while monitoring radio communications and maintaining tactical awareness of the broader battle developing around them. The 5th M61 shell struck the Panther's rear armor at a range of less than 150 meters, penetrating the engine compartment and setting the tank's fuel supply ablaze. German engineers had designed sophisticated fire suppression systems, but these proved inadequate against the combination of penetrating fragment and burning diesel. Within minutes, the Panther was engulfed in flames that rose above the fog layer and marked another German defeat for observers across the battlefield. Poole's engagement with the 4th and final Panther reflected the evolution of American tactical thinking under combat conditions. Instead of seeking immediate destruction of the enemy tank, Poole maneuvered to threaten the German crew's escape route while maintaining his own freedom of movement. This psychological pressure forced the German commander to make hasty decisions that compromised his tactical position. The German tank attempted to withdraw while maintaining fire discipline, but the fog made coordinated movement nearly impossible. Poole followed the sound of the Panther's engine while using terrain features to mask his own approach. When the German tank became visible through the thinning fog, it was positioned hull down behind inadequate cover that exposed its vulnerable turret ring and side armor. Poole's 6th and final shot of the engagement struck the Panther's turret at the junction between the gun mantlet and turret face. The M61 shell penetrated completely, disabling the German tank's fire control system and wounding both the gunner and commander. Unable to fight or effectively withdraw, the surviving German crew abandoned their vehicle and disappeared into the morning fog. The engagement at Aracourt had lasted less than 40 minutes, but its psychological impact reverberated throughout German armored units for the remainder of the war. Intelligence reports from captured German officers revealed that news of the Phantom Sherman had spread rapidly through Wehrmacht communications networks, creating doubt about Panther invincibility that German propaganda could never completely overcome. Poole's tactical success reflected broader changes in American military effectiveness that German commanders had failed to recognize. By late 1944, American tank crews had accumulated combat experience that rivaled their German counterparts, while American industrial capacity provided equipment advantages that made up for remaining technological gaps. Most importantly, American tactical doctrine had evolved to emphasize adaptability and initiative rather than rigid adherence to prescribed procedures. The fog that had concealed Poole's maneuvering began to lift completely as the morning sun climbed higher, revealing the full scope of the engagement to observers on both sides. 4 German Panthers lay destroyed or abandoned across the battlefield, their burning hulks sending columns of black smoke into the clearing sky. Poole's Sherman, though bearing scars from multiple near misses, remained operational and combat-ready. German reaction to the engagement revealed fundamental weaknesses in Wehrmacht organizational structure that would contribute to their ultimate defeat. Instead of analyzing Poole's tactics and adapting their own procedures, German commanders dismissed the engagement as an anomaly caused by unusual weather conditions. This institutional inability to learn from tactical defeats reflected broader problems of command rigidity that handicapped German forces throughout the later war period. American tactical analysis, by contrast, immediately sought to understand and replicate Poole's success. Within weeks, American armored units throughout Europe were receiving training bulletins describing close-range engagement techniques and sound navigation methods developed at Aracourt. This systematic approach to tactical innovation gave American forces cumulative advantages that multiplied over time. Poole's crew had discovered something that German military theorists had never adequately considered. Industrial warfare favored armies that could adapt rapidly to changing conditions, rather than those that relied on technological superiority alone. The Sherman tank, despite its individual limitations compared to German designs, proved capable of evolution and improvement in ways that reflected American industrial and military culture. The broader Battle of Aracourt continued for several more days, with German armored units launching repeated counterattacks against advancing American forces. But the psychological impact of Poole's engagement had already begun affecting German tactical decision-making. Panther commanders became more cautious about engaging Shermans at close range, reducing the effectiveness of German armor in exactly those situations where technological advantages should have been most decisive. By September 30th, the German 11th Panzer Division had withdrawn across the Moselle River, having lost more than 60 tanks in exchange for minimal American casualties. American intelligence attributed this favorable exchange ratio partly to superior tactical adaptation and partly to German demoralization caused by unexpected defeats like Poole's engagement in the fog. Poole himself received the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions at Aracourt, though he remained characteristically modest about his achievement. In post-war interviews, he consistently credited his crew's teamwork and American industrial capacity rather than individual heroism. This attitude reflected broader American military culture that emphasized collective achievement over individual glory. The technical lessons learned at Aracourt influenced American tank development for decades after World War II ended. Engineers recognized that crew training and tactical flexibility could compensate for individual vehicle limitations, leading to design philosophies that emphasized reliability and adaptability over raw performance specifications. German armored doctrine, by contrast, never fully recovered from the psychological impact of engagements like Aracourt. The myth of Panther invincibility, once shattered, could never be completely restored. German tank crews began approaching combat with defensive rather than offensive mindsets, reducing their effectiveness even when technological advantages remained. The morning fog that had concealed Poole's maneuvering became a metaphor for the broader strategic situation confronting German forces in late 1944. What had seemed clear and advantageous from a distance became confused and threatening when examined at close range. American industrial capacity, tactical adaptability, and crew training created cumulative advantages that German technology alone could not overcome. As autumn progressed into winter, the lessons of Aracourt were validated repeatedly across the Western Front. American Sherman crews, inspired by stories of the Phantom tank, developed increasing confidence in close-range engagements with German armor. This psychological transformation proved as important as any technological advantage in determining the war's outcome. Poole's engagement near Aracourt represented more than individual heroism or tactical innovation. It demonstrated the evolution of American military effectiveness from the uncertain early days of North African operations to the confident competence that would carry Allied forces to victory in 1945. The fog of war had lifted to reveal not German technological superiority, but American adaptability and resolve. The Sherman tank, once dismissed by German propaganda as inferior equipment for inferior soldiers, had proven its worth in the ultimate test of combat effectiveness. More importantly, it had proven that American industrial democracy could produce not just superior quantities of equipment, but superior quality of soldiers to operate that equipment under the most demanding conditions. Years later, military historians would recognize the Battle of Aracourt as a turning point where American armored forces achieved psychological dominance over their German counterparts. But for the men who fought there, including Staff Sergeant Lafayette Poole and his crew, it remained simply another day's work in the long campaign to liberate Europe from fascist tyranny. The strategic implications of Poole's victory extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. General George S. Patton, commanding the Third Army, had been watching the Aracourt sector with growing concern as German armor concentrations threatened to cut off his advance toward the Rhine. The success of Poole's Sherman crew, along with similar achievements by other American tank units, convinced Patton that his forces could continue their aggressive advance without waiting for additional reinforcements. This decision proved crucial to the broader Allied strategy in Western Europe. Had American forces halted their advance to consolidate their positions, German commanders would have gained precious time to establish defensive lines along the Rhine River that might have prolonged the war by months or even years. Instead, the psychological impact of engagements like Poole's convinced American commanders that German resistance was cracking under sustained pressure. The emotional toll of the Aracourt engagement weighed heavily on Poole's crew in ways that military reports could never adequately capture. Sergeant Hamby, the gunner whose marksmanship had proven decisive in multiple engagements, later described the strange mixture of elation and horror he felt watching German tanks explode under his fire. The technical achievement of successful gunnery was inseparable from the human cost of destroying enemy crews who were, in many cases, barely older than himself. Corporal Richards, whose childhood hunting experience had proved crucial to navigating by sound in the fog, struggled with nightmares for weeks after the engagement. The distinctive sound of German Maybach engines, once merely a tactical warning, became a trigger for cold sweats and insomnia that would plague him for years after the war ended. Army medical personnel, still learning to recognize what would later be called post-traumatic stress disorder, provided little help beyond recommending that Richards shake it off and focus on upcoming missions. Poole himself maintained the stoic exterior expected of a combat leader, but his letters home revealed the psychological strain of continuous combat operations. Writing to his wife in rural Texas, he described the fog-shrouded engagement in terms that emphasized mechanical details and tactical procedures, while carefully avoiding any mention of the human consequences. This emotional compartmentalization allowed him to continue functioning as an effective tank commander, but the psychological costs would become apparent only years later. The German perspective on the Aracourt engagement revealed cultural differences that reflected broader contrasts between American and German military traditions. Obergefreiter Klaus Weber, the sole survivor of the Panther platoon that Poole had destroyed, spent the remainder of the war in an American prisoner camp where he was extensively debriefed by Allied intelligence officers. His account of the engagement revealed a worldview shaped by Prussian military traditions that emphasized technical superiority and rigid tactical discipline. Weber expressed genuine bewilderment at American tactical methods that seemed to violate fundamental principles of armored warfare. The idea that a Sherman crew would deliberately close range against Panther tanks struck him as either suicidal or indicative of inadequate training. He repeatedly asked his interrogators whether American tank crews received proper instruction in the technical capabilities of their own equipment, apparently unable to conceive that they might knowingly accept tactical disadvantages in pursuit of strategic objectives. This cultural disconnect extended throughout the German military hierarchy, influencing strategic decisions that ultimately contributed to Germany's defeat. Wehrmacht commanders consistently underestimated American tactical adaptability because it conflicted with German assumptions about the relationship between technical superiority and battlefield success. They failed to recognize that American military culture, shaped by democratic traditions and industrial experience, produced soldiers capable of innovation under pressure. The technological legacy of the Aracourt engagement influenced American armored vehicle development throughout the Cold War period. Engineers studying Poole's tactical reports recognized that crew coordination and situational awareness had proven more important than individual vehicle specifications in determining combat outcomes. This insight led to design philosophies that emphasized human factors engineering and crew ergonomics over pure performance specifications. The M60 Patton tank, developed in the 1950s as the Sherman's eventual successor, incorporated lessons learned from engagements like Poole's fog-shrouded battle. Its improved fire control systems and crew communication equipment reflected recognition that technological advantages meant nothing without proper crew training and tactical coordination. American tank crews of the Cold War era received training scenarios specifically based on Poole's close-range engagement techniques, ensuring that his tactical innovations would influence American armored doctrine for decades. Soviet military analysts, despite ideological differences with the United States, studied Poole's engagement with intense interest as they developed their own armored warfare doctrine. The T-54 tank, which became the Soviet Union's primary battle tank in the 1950s, incorporated design features that reflected lessons learned from German failures at Aracourt. Soviet engineers emphasized crew survivability and rapid-fire capabilities over the raw armor protection that had characterized German designs. The cultural impact of Poole's achievement extended beyond military circles to influence American civilian perception of the war in Europe. Newspapers across the United States carried accounts of the Phantom Sherman that emphasized American technological ingenuity and democratic values over European traditions of military hierarchy. These stories, while sometimes embellished for propaganda purposes, helped maintain civilian support for the war effort during a period when victory seemed tantalizingly close, yet still frustratingly distant. Hollywood filmmakers of the 1940s and 1950s drew inspiration from Poole's story for war movies that shaped American cultural memory of World War II. While these films often distorted tactical details for dramatic effect, they accurately captured the psychological transformation that had occurred in American military culture between 1942 and 1944. The confident Sherman crews depicted in post-war cinema reflected real changes in American military effectiveness that engagements like Aracourt had demonstrated. Strategic analysts examining the Aracourt engagement from a contemporary perspective have identified several alternative courses of action that might have produced different outcomes. Had German commanders recognized the tactical significance of the fog conditions, they might have postponed their advance until visibility improved, negating Poole's primary advantage. Alternatively, more aggressive use of German artillery and air support might have neutralized American armor before close-range engagements became possible. The American side also faced strategic choices that could have altered the engagement's outcome. Poole's decision to advance aggressively toward German positions violated established doctrine and could easily have resulted in his crew's destruction. A more cautious approach, emphasizing coordination with supporting units and artillery fire, might have achieved similar results with lower risk. However, such caution might also have allowed German forces to withdraw in good order, preserving their combat strength for future engagements. The weather conditions that made Poole's tactics possible resulted from a combination of meteorological factors that military planners could not have predicted or controlled. The fog that provided concealment for American maneuvering was created by temperature inversions typical of late September in the Lorraine region, combined with high humidity from recent rainfall. German intelligence had failed to consider how these conditions might affect their tactical advantages, reflecting broader problems with Wehrmacht weather forecasting capabilities. American meteorological services, by contrast, had developed sophisticated weather prediction capabilities that gave their forces strategic advantages throughout the European campaign. The Army Air Force's weather reconnaissance flights provided detailed forecasts that allowed American commanders to plan operations around expected conditions. This scientific approach to military planning reflected broader American advantages in technical education and industrial research capacity. The human cost of the Aracourt engagement extended beyond the immediate participants to affect families and communities on both sides of the Atlantic. Poole's wife, Martha, received news of her husband's decoration through a terse War Department telegram that provided no details about the circumstances of his achievement. She would not learn the full story of the fog encounter until Poole returned home months later, by which time the psychological impact of continuous combat had fundamentally changed his personality. German families faced even greater uncertainty about the fate of their sons and husbands serving in armored units. The 4 Panther crews destroyed by Poole represented 16 young men whose families would receive only standardized casualty notifications, providing no details about how or why their loved ones had died. The fog that concealed Poole's maneuvering also obscured the human tragedy unfolding within the burning German tanks. The medical consequences of armored combat, while less visible than infantry casualties, created lasting disabilities that affected veterans for decades after the war ended. Tank crews who survived hits suffered from a range of injuries including burns, concussions, and hearing damage from the confined explosions within their vehicles. Poole's crew, despite emerging from their engagement without serious physical injuries, all showed symptoms of what military physicians called combat fatigue, behavioral changes that indicated severe psychological stress. The economic implications of the Aracourt engagement reflected broader patterns of industrial warfare that favored nations with superior manufacturing capacity. Each German Panther destroyed by Poole represented an investment of approximately 250,000 Reichsmarks and consumed critical materials including tungsten, molybdenum, and other strategic metals that Germany could barely afford to lose. The Sherman that achieved this destruction had cost American taxpayers roughly $45,000 and used materials that American industry could easily replace. This economic asymmetry proved decisive in determining the war's outcome. German armored forces, no matter how technically superior their individual vehicles, could not sustain the attrition rates that American industrial capacity made acceptable for Allied forces. Poole's engagement demonstrated this principle in microcosm. One American tank crew, properly trained and equipped, could destroy multiple German tanks while remaining operationally effective. The logistical challenges of supporting armored operations in the Aracourt sector tested both American and German supply capabilities under real combat conditions. Poole's Sherman consumed approximately 150 gallons of gasoline during the day-long engagement, requiring fuel supplies that had to be transported hundreds of miles from American ports on the Atlantic coast. German Panther tanks, with their more complex Maybach engines, required specialized lubricants and spare parts that were increasingly difficult to obtain as Allied bombing disrupted German manufacturing. American logistical success in maintaining fuel supplies to forward armored units reflected organizational capabilities that German commanders consistently underestimated. The Red Ball Express, a convoy system that delivered supplies from Normandy beaches to frontline units, represented an achievement in military logistics that had no equivalent in German military experience. This capability allowed American commanders to maintain aggressive tactical operations even when local supply difficulties might have forced other armies to adopt defensive postures. The intelligence warfare surrounding the Aracourt engagement revealed the growing sophistication of American signals intelligence capabilities. Poole's crew had received warnings about German armor concentrations through radio intercepts that British cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park had decoded using captured German encryption equipment. This intelligence advantage allowed American commanders to position their forces advantageously, while German units remained largely ignorant of Allied intentions. German intelligence services, by contrast, had largely failed to penetrate American communication security or understand the scope of Allied industrial preparations. Their assessments of American military capabilities remained influenced by outdated stereotypes about American technological competence and fighting spirit. The success of Poole's crew, along with similar achievements throughout the European theater, gradually forced German intelligence to revise their estimates. But these adjustments came too late to influence strategic planning. The propaganda implications of Poole's achievement were carefully managed by American and German information services to support their respective war efforts. American newspapers emphasized the technological innovation and democratic values that had enabled a Sherman crew to overcome supposedly superior German equipment. German propaganda, conversely, portrayed the Aracourt defeats as temporary setbacks, caused by exceptional circumstances rather than fundamental changes in military capability. These competing narratives reflected broader struggles to maintain public morale during a period when the war's outcome was becoming increasingly apparent to informed observers. American propaganda sought to sustain civilian support for continued military spending and sacrifice by demonstrating that American forces were achieving decisive victories. German propaganda attempted to maintain resistance by portraying temporary defeats as preparation for ultimate victory through new wonder weapons that remained under development. The training implications of Poole's success influenced American armored warfare doctrine development for the remainder of World War II and beyond. Tank crew training programs were modified to emphasize close-range engagement techniques and sound navigation methods that Poole's crew had developed under combat conditions. These modifications required additional training time and resources, but American industrial capacity could absorb these costs more easily than German forces could adapt to American tactical innovations. German training programs, handicapped by fuel shortages and equipment scarcity, could not provide their crews with adequate preparation for the close-range combat that American forces increasingly emphasized. German tank commanders continued to receive training based on doctrinal assumptions about long-range engagement and technological superiority that Poole's success had proven inadequate. This training gap became a cumulative disadvantage that worsened as the war progressed. The morale impact of Poole's engagement spread throughout American armored units in ways that formal reports could never adequately measure. Sherman crews who had previously approached combat with resignation or fear began to develop confidence that German armor was not invincible. This psychological transformation proved as important as any technological advantage in determining subsequent battle outcomes. The ripple effects of this morale boost extended to American infantry units that worked closely with armored forces. Soldiers who had previously seen German tanks as nearly unstoppable threats began to develop tactical approaches that emphasized coordination with their own armor, rather than passive defensive measures. This shift in attitude contributed to the increasingly aggressive nature of American operations during the final months of the European campaign. The weather conditions that had made Poole's tactics possible occurred sporadically throughout the autumn of 1944, creating additional opportunities for similar engagements. American commanders, having recognized the tactical advantages that fog and reduced visibility could provide, began planning operations specifically designed to exploit these conditions. German forces, conversely, attempted to avoid combat during periods of limited visibility, ceding tactical initiative to American units. This adaptation represented a fundamental shift in the psychological balance of the European campaign. German forces, which had previously sought combat under conditions that maximized their technological advantages, increasingly found themselves reacting to American initiatives rather than dictating the terms of engagement. The cumulative effect of this change was to accelerate German military collapse, even when local tactical situations might have favored continued resistance. The technical lessons learned from Poole's engagement influenced post-war tank development programs in ways that extended beyond purely military applications. The emphasis on crew coordination and situational awareness that had proven crucial at Aracourt found applications in civilian industries including aviation, shipping, and even early computer systems development. American engineers recognized that the principles governing effective tank crews could be applied to any complex system requiring human-machine coordination. The international implications of American armored warfare success at engagements like Aracourt extended far beyond the immediate conflict with Germany. Soviet military observers, despite their alliance with the United States, carefully studied American tactical innovations for potential application in their own armored forces. The Cold War competition that emerged after 1945 was influenced by Soviet attempts to match or exceed American capabilities demonstrated during World War II. Did you hear about the fog that concealed one of history's greatest tank battles? Have you ever wondered how psychological warfare could be more powerful than superior technology? The story of the Phantom Sherman reminds us that in war, as in life, adaptability and teamwork often triumph over individual advantages. These stories of courage and innovation deserve to be remembered and shared. If this account of American ingenuity and determination moved you, please consider subscribing to this channel and sharing this video with others who appreciate the sacrifices made by the greatest generation. Their legacy of courage, skill, and dedication continues to inspire us today, and it is our responsibility to ensure their stories are never forgotten.